Welcome to Darkness Falls. I'm your host Adnan. This is episode 5, The D.B. Cooper Mystery. November 24, 1971 was a rainy day in Portland, Oregon. The next day was Thanksgiving and there was a rush of travelers. A man wearing a dark trench coat, a dark suit with a skinny black tie, a clean white shirt, horn-rimmed sunglasses, and loafers walked up to the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines. He appeared to be in his 40s, nearly 6 feet tall with a receding hairline. According to eyewitness statements later on, it was said that he looked like a business executive. He bought a $20 ticket for Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 bound for Seattle. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, which later turned out to be fake. The plane carried 36 passengers that day, not including the pilot, first officer, flight engineer, and flight attendants. The man carried a black attaché case and sat in the last row of the Boeing 727 for the 30-minute flight, seat 18C. He ordered a drink, bourbon and soda while the flight was waiting to take off. Once the plane was in flight, he handed a note to Florence Schaffner, a stewardess, who thought little of it at first, as stewardesses sometimes were slipped phone numbers by male passengers. At one point, Cooper quietly told Schaffner, "Miss, you'd better look at the note, I have a bomb." The note mentioned the bomb and directed her to sit beside Cooper. Schaffner did as requested, then quietly asked to see the bomb. Cooper opened his briefcase long enough for her to glimpse 8 red cylinders in 2 rows of 4, assumed to be a dynamite. A wire was attached to the cylinders and a large cylindrical battery was in the briefcase as well. After closing the briefcase, he stated his demands: $200,000, which is valued $1.3 million in 2022, in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon arrival. The captain was notified and he contacted Seattle Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control, which informed local and federal authorities. The plane circled the area around Puget Sound for about 2 hours while police and FBI agents gathered the money and parachutes. Passengers were told that a minor mechanical issue occurred and the landing would be delayed. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow recalled that Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain. The other flight attendant, Schaffner, described Cooper as calm, polite, and well-spoken. FBI agents assembled the ransom money from several Seattle area banks, 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, and made a microfilm photograph of each of them. Cooper rejected the military-issued parachutes offered by McCord Air Force Base personnel, instead demanding 4 civilian parachutes with manually operated ripcords. Seattle police obtained them from a local skydiving school. After the flight landed in Seattle, Cooper released the 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants when authorities provided the money and parachutes. However, he forced 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and a flight attendant to remain on the plane. Cooper outlined his flight plan to the cockpit crew: a southeast course towards Mexico City at minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, approximately 100 knots, which is 185 km per hour, at a maximum 10,000 foot altitude. He further specified that the landing gear remain deployed in takeoff position, the wing flaps be lowered 15 degrees and the cabin remain unpressurized. First Officer William informed Cooper that the aircraft's range was limited to approximately 1,000 miles under the specified flight configuration, which meant that a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper and the crew discussed options and agreed on Reno Tahoe International Airport in Nevada as a refueling stop. Cooper also demanded that the aircraft take off with the rear exit door open and its staircase extended. He relented on the last demand when the crew told him that it was unsafe to take off with the staircase deployed. He stated that he would open it himself when they were in air. It was now night time and rain was getting heavier. Soon after the 7:36 p.m. takeoff, Cooper asked flight attendant Tina Mucklow to show him how to open the door to the back staircase. Once she had done so, he sent her to the cockpit with the rest of the crew. Two fighter aircraft from McCord Air Force Base followed behind the airliner, one above it and one below, out of Cooper's view. At approximately 8 p.m., a warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating that the air stair apparatus had been activated. The pilots asked on the cabin intercom if Cooper needed assistance. Cooper picked up the cabin phone and replied, "No." This was the last message heard from Cooper. At 8:13 p.m., the tail section of the plane sustained a sudden and noticeable upward movement. D.B. Cooper had jumped out of the plane. At 10:15 p.m., the jet landed in Reno, Nevada. Scott spoke over the intercom and, after receiving no response, he opened the cockpit door. The cabin was empty. Cooper, along with the money and all of his belongings, was gone. The two fighter jets following the plane didn't see D.B. Cooper falling, but that could be due to the poor visibility caused by darkness and rain. The FBI began their NORJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking investigation, immediately. The search and recovery operation that resulted was arguably the most extensive in US history. FBI started collecting fingerprints and interviewing eyewitnesses in Portland. Sketch artist portraits of the hijacker were created. The FBI described Cooper as a white male, 6 foot 1 inch tall, 175 pounds, age mid-40s, olive complexion, brown eyes, black hair, conventional cut, parted on left. A precise search area was difficult to define, as even small differences in estimates of the aircraft's speed or the environmental conditions along the flight path changed Cooper's projected landing point considerably. An important variable was the length of time Cooper remained in free fall before pulling his ripcord. The inclement weather that night prevented the police from searching the grounds until the next day. That Thanksgiving and for several weeks afterwards, the police performed an extensive search that failed to turn up any trace of the hijacker or the parachute. In an experimental recreation of the incident with the same aircraft used in the hijacking and the same flight configuration, FBI agents pushed a 200-pound sled out of the open air stair. They were able to reproduce similar upward motion of the tail section and brief change in cabin pressure. Initially, the landing zone was presumed to be in the area around Lake Merwin, a man-made lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River in Washington. This was concluded through recreations and calculations. However, later analysis determined the real drop zone was probably closer to Washougal River, further southeast than the original location. The search for the ransom money also began quickly, as it could lead to Cooper. A month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, and other businesses that routinely conducted large cash transactions, and to law enforcement agencies around the world. Northwest Orient offered a 15% reward of the recovered money, to a maximum of $25,000. In early 1972, U.S. Attorney General released the serial numbers to the general public. Lots of theories emerged over the following months of the incident. A popular theory was that Cooper didn't survive the jump. Although Cooper seemed to have knowledge about aircrafts, the evidence suggests that he wasn't an expert skydiver. He wasn't dressed adequately for such a jump. He also used a reserve parachute out of the four, which is sewn shut and was used for classroom demonstrations. He also didn't request for a helmet or gear in relation to skydiving. All these suggesting that he wasn't a professional skydiver. Even if his parachute did open, it was not a type that could be steered, and landing in rough wooded terrain at night is dangerous, particularly for a man wearing just suit, loafers, and a trench coat. He had knowledge about the terrain and also located the Air Force base, which led to suggestions that he may have been an Air Force veteran. He was also thought to be an aircraft cargo loader or someone who worked closely with aircrafts. The FBI was also skeptical of Cooper's odds of survival, concluding that he lacked crucial skydiving skills and experience. The only physical evidence related to the case found to date was discovered in 1980. On February 10, a young boy, Brian Ingram, found rotting packages containing $5,800 of $20 bills on a stretch of beach along the Columbia River known as Tena Bar. The bills had disintegrated from lengthy exposure to the elements, but they were still bundled in rubber bands. It was quickly reported to investigators, and they soon found that the bills matched the serial numbers of Cooper's ransom money. Search was launched in the area, but nothing else was found, and the rest of the money has still never been located. The discovery launched several new rounds of conjecture and ultimately raised more questions than it answered. FBI also started to look into suspects. More than 800 suspects would come to their attention over the first 5 years of the investigation. One of the most popular suspects was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. He was an Army veteran who served 2 tours in Vietnam, including one with the Green Berets as a helicopter pilot. After the war, he served in the Utah National Guard and in his free time was an amateur skydiver. His knowledge of planes and skydiving is notable. But that's not what makes McCoy so intriguing. In April 1972, 5 months after Cooper disappeared, McCoy, using a fake name, hijacked a United Airlines flight out of Denver. Armed with a paperweight that looked like a grenade and an unloaded handgun, he demanded 4 parachutes and $500,000. Once he got his ransom, he demanded the aircraft take off again and proceeded to jump out of the plane somewhere over Provo, Utah. He was arrested 2 days later. After his arrest, McCoy was sentenced to 45 years in prison. In 1974, he managed to escape and stayed on the run for several months. He was finally tracked down in Virginia and died there in a gunfight with FBI agents. Despite this, the FBI has ruled McCoy out as a suspect. Although his modus operandi was strikingly similar to Cooper's, he was not the only hijacker inspired by him. Airplane hijackings were surprisingly frequent in the 1970s. By the middle of the decade, 150 planes had been skyjacked in the US alone. He also did not match the physical description. He was in Las Vegas on the day of the hijacking and back home in Utah for Thanksgiving the next day. And he was too experienced with skydiving. Another suspect was Robert Rackstraw. He was a retired pilot and ex-convict who served on an Army helicopter crew and other units during the Vietnam War. He came to the attention of the Cooper Task Force in February 1978 after he was arrested in Iran and deported to the US to face explosive possession charges. Cooper investigators noted his physical resemblance to Cooper composite sketches, military parachute training and criminal record, but eliminated him as a suspect in 1979 after no direct evidence of his involvement could be found. There were several other suspects and some deathbed confessions occurred as well. The name of suspects such as Kenneth Peter Christensen, Sheridan Peterson, William J. Smith, Duane L. Weber come up while discussing the case. In July of 2016, the FBI officially announced they would no longer be allocating active resources to continuing the D.B. Cooper investigation. This did not mean that they had solved the case of Cooper's identity though. The leading theory by investigators is that Cooper did not in fact survive his jump. The money never circulated and the notes found along the riverbed suggest his demise as well. This incident brought in many changes in airport security and aircraft modification. The case still fascinates people around the world. There have been many civilian sleuths working on the case over the years. His name and legend have also been featured in national entertainment. He was the inspiration for the name Dale Cooper in Twin Peaks. The Loki television series on Disney Plus included a scene that showed Loki was actually Cooper in its premiere episode. The Cooper case has inspired movies such as the 1981 thriller The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper. Documentaries like the History Channel's D.B. Cooper Case Closed. HBO and BBC produced documentary on the case as well. An upcoming project produced by Netflix titled DB Cooper, Where Are You? Will shed some light and hopefully some new evidence on the decades-old case. Who was the mysterious hijacker? Where did he go? Over the past 5 decades, people have speculated about the answers to these questions, and theories abound. From fellow hijackers to deathbed confessors, possible DB Coopers are still popping up well into the 21st century. We might never know the truth about the identity of the man who disappeared on the rainy night in 1971, but the enduring mystery has undoubtedly made DB Cooper's disappearance a modern-day American legend. In the 50 years since his jump into history, Cooper has never been found. But as a legend, a mystery, and a pop culture artifact, he has left a lasting legacy in the Pacific Northwest and around the world. Thank you for listening to Darkness Falls. If you have liked this episode, please subscribe and share. It will help this podcast to grow. You can also leave suggestions on the comment box. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.